Good evening. The head of FIFA, World Football's governing body, has hit back at Western critics of Qatar's record on human rights, calling their comments hypocrisy. Gianni Infantino was speaking ahead of the Men's Football World Cup, which starts tomorrow. Qatar has faced intense scrutiny from the West over issues including its treatment of women, gay rights and conditions for migrant workers. Here's our sports editor Dan Rowan.
Despite everything, Qatar's determined to put on a show. A celebration to mark the opening of the fan park in Doha tonight on the eve of the World Cup. But FIFA's come under fire for bringing the event here amid human rights concerns. And today the game's most powerful figure turned on his critics in an extraordinary speech.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker, because I know what it means to be discriminated.
But that was just the start. Infantino then appearing to liken his own experience as a red-headed child of immigrants in Switzerland to the plight of gay people in the Middle East.
As a foreigner in a foreign country, as a child at school, I was bullied because I had red hair.
Qatar's been under mounting scrutiny, especially in Europe, over its treatment of migrant workers and the LGBT community, and Infantino then turned on the critics.
I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons. It's just hypocrisy.
Isn't it hypocritical to, on the one hand, say that FIFA stands for equality and non-discrimination, while at the same time supporting an event in a country which has discriminatory laws?
The only weapon that we have is the ball. And we have to try with this to engage.
Infantino praised Qatar for recent labour reforms and said Europe was in no position to criticise on migrant rights, but his comments have been condemned.
I found it jaw-dropping to listen to. It really felt like it was a way to try and dismiss very legitimate human rights criticisms, to try and treat them as culture war issues rather than universal values that FIFA has committed to uphold.
As for FIFA's late U-turn with beer banned at World Cup stadia, Infantino was no less defiant.
I think personally, if for 3 hours a day you cannot drink a beer, you will survive.
Well, Gianni Infantino intended just then to hit back against this tournament's critics amid a barrage of negative headlines in the build-up. But after that remarkable hour-and-a-half-long press conference on the eve of this tournament, once again the focus is away from the football.
Organisers hope tonight's festivities will kick-start the excitement. But right now, this World Cup seems more divisive than ever.
Well, Infantino's incendiary comments will no doubt be welcomed by the Qatari authorities here, who have been stung by recent criticism from the European media. But after yesterday's remarkable late U-turn over the beer ban in stadia, I think others will now be questioning the credibility of the FIFA president on the eve of the World Cup.
Dan Rowan, thank you very much. There are reports that delegates at the climate conference in Egypt are close to reaching a deal over a fund to help the countries worst hit by climate change. Our climate editor Justin Rolat is there for us now. Justin, what's the latest? How close are they to a breakthrough on this deal?
I'm really sorry to say, Tina, but not as close as we thought. They're discussing the final, details of the deal in this room behind me here, and we thought they'd be done in the next half hour or hour or so. But a few grim-faced negotiators come out and shaking their heads and saying it's probably hours away a deal. The logjam was broken, loss and damage, this key issue for developing nations. An agreement's been done on that. The last issue is raising ambition on cutting carbon emissions, and it seems that is just a lot tougher than we expected. So we are waiting out here for news as it happens.
Justin, for now, thank you. Rishi Sunak has made his first visit to Ukraine since becoming Prime Minister. He held talks with President Zelensky, pledging £50 million in defence aid, and said the UK would continue to stand by Ukrainians as they face further attacks from Russia. Our political correspondent Ione Wells reports.
A warm reception on a snowy day in Kyiv.
Very good to see you. Well, there we go. Like I was saying, I've got my coat for later.
In footage released by the Ukrainian government and Number 10, Rishi Sunak can be seen laying flowers at a memorial for victims of the war. He met with emergency responders and announced a new package of air defence to help protect Ukrainian civilians and infrastructure from Russian airstrikes. Ukraine has faced months of intense Russian aerial attacks. Forces there say there have been 148 missile strikes on critical services, leaving 10 million people without power. The Prime Minister's main message was to confirm the UK's support for the country would continue.
As Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I'm proud of how we stood with you from the very beginning. And I'm here today to say that the United Kingdom will continue to stand with you. We will stand with you until Ukraine has won the peace and security it needs and deserves. And then we will stand with you as you rebuild your great country.
Thank you so much, Rishi.
President Zelensky thanked the Prime Minister for supporting his country and the dialogue they had. His visit comes after a difficult week for him and the Chancellor, who announced a range of tax rises and public spending squeezes. The UK's foreign aid and defence budgets won't go up as planned yet until the economic situation improves. Ministers blame the war in Ukraine for the dire economic situation in the UK. Opposition parties argue political decisions played a role too. There's a clear desire to avoid public fatigue with the conflict and demonstrate the positives of supporting Ukraine. An easier message to sell, perhaps, than the economic headlines they face back home. Ione Wells, BBC News.
The boss of a housing association has been sacked 4 days after a coroner found that a toddler died from exposure to mould in one of its properties. 2-year-old Awab Ishak, who lived in Rochdale, died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by the mould. Gareth Swarbrick apologised on Thursday but had rejected calls to step down. Our correspondent Sharon Barber reports.
Today, many from the Rochdale community came together to remember 2-year-old Awab Ishak and to put pressure on Rochdale borough-wide housing. Since the coroner's damning verdict that the mould in Awab's family home had contributed to his death, there'd been calls for Gareth Swarbrick to go. But he refused, saying he had the full backing of the board at Rochdale borough-wide housing. But no longer. Today, the board took the decision to remove him from his post with immediate effect. In a statement, Rochdale Borough-wide Housing said our original instincts were for Gareth to stay on, to see the organisation through this difficult period and to make the necessary changes, but we all recognise that this is no longer tenable. The coroner noted that RBH had made changes as a result of the tragic death of Awab. Under new leadership, RBH will continue to embed these changes. For a family in grief, this offered some sense of justice.
The fact that RBH's chief executive had to be sacked as opposed to resign, for the family speaks volumes. However, they find it wholly unacceptable that the board expressed confidence in him in the first place. The family still feel that much more needs to be done.
A government source told the BBC that it welcomed Gareth Swarbrick's removal from office, but said Rochdale Borough-wide Housing still have very serious questions to answer. Sharon Barber, BBC News.
After 5 weeks, the Rugby League World Cup reached its climax this afternoon with 2 finals at Old Trafford. Adam Wilde was watching all the action.
This is Rugby League's biggest occasion. The last dance, no second chances. For Samoa to make it this far is perhaps surprising. Australia charging into a first half lead. Well, that shocked no one. Even with all the pride, the passion of Samoa, this was painful. James Tedesco taking a direct line. Australia unstoppable, unbeatable, men's world champions once more. Earlier, Australia faced down their closest rivals in the women's final. Just inches apart before kick-off, the gap between them and New Zealand would get bigger rather quickly, running in 10 tries for a third consecutive women's title.
So the final day of this Rugby League World Cup belongs once again to Australia. The women's champions, the men's champions, and all the others still have some way to go. Adam Wilde, BBC News at Old Trafford.
Well, that's it from us. We are back with the late news at 10:35. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Goodbye.